You are watching
I
Xirtus.
was stuck on an airplane for cumulative like 20 hours. So I read through all of Genuflect, which was the very first Tracy book I ever read. And it was so different from anything I was expecting. And I guess I was kind of going in a little bit blind that I saw it. It was sort of like Synctank meets Harry Potter in a way. That was what my walked away with Genuflect. But so many people have described her work to me as if it were going to be some kind of reference book or like a very like literal here's some research, when I kind of found myself like getting into like a fictional novel at some way, right? So when I started reading Mini Moose, it was a little bit of that same feeling. I'm just curious from you guys, how much of it is Harry Potter and how much of it is like real research? And I hate to use the word real there, but like how would you
What do you
classify
mean? What do you
it?
mean by Harry Potter? You mean like in terms of her relationship to occultism? It's like
In
Harry Potter level, or
Genuflect, it felt like it was fictionalized in a really interesting way in which the research could be presented as a story, but it felt just as much as a fictional
Mm.
novel as Harry Potter did.
Well, just so you know, Tracy, it used to be, I don't know what it is now, but while she was around, if you went onto Wikipedia and just looked up Baphomet, almost everything came from her. Like she was considered like the authority on everything related to Baphomet. And so she wrote on that, but she's very empirical. She was so prolific. If you're looking at Minnie's Mouse or whatever, the that book was never like officially published until after she passed. And so like the way that that book is presented, like you said in a message that it felt more like a PowerPoint presentation, like that was like what she used as the basis for the set of films she was working on, like that film series. But there was like supposed to be another chapter to that, and so she died while she was working on it. It's a little misleading, like when people are saying that she was just looking at like Hollywood pedo stuff. Yes, she was, but she was very focused on a specific summer camp at the time of her death that was run by like really ridiculously rich people. And I don't know, it's kind of strange to share this online, but in this format, but I'll just go ahead if you don't mind.
Go, go,
Uh,
go.
so there was a video that she had given to at least two people she was close with that said, if anything happens to me, I want you to release this. Out of respect for her family, as far as I know, it was never like uploaded for the public, but a copy of it was given to me at the time, very shortly after her death. And I watched the whole thing, and basically it was her showing like how the people who ran this summer camp were basically torturing her. So I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to have my shit hacked or whatever, you know. And if she recommended to people not to look this up. So she was like, don't follow this thread because it leads to a really bad place. And so they were threatening her life. They had hacked her computer and were sending her messages that she was able to prove of what they were doing. They were playing back things from her camera on her computer from her own personal life that she didn't know that they had access to. So they were showing off their own capabilities of whatever people they probably had working for them to do this kind of techie stuff that a lot of people probably weren't conspiracy minded enough to really think that it's even some of it's even possible, but they were monitoring her whole life. And so I do think that Tracy killed herself at this point, but I think she was driven to it by these people. And
For sure.
so it's really
Yeah,
scary.
here's a funny quote. So Eddie posted this at some point ever, I guess January of this year. Sex Slaves in the CIA is a collection of essays and interviews about Project Monarch, compiled and edited by Tracy Twyman. And then this quote from Tracy: isn't it logical that if our parents were Satanists or occultists, they might subject us to similar indoctrination? And since satanic and occult practices purportedly bestow worldly powers upon their practitioners, isn't it logical that some of our most powerful leaders might participate in such practices? Isn't it logical that they would make use of occult-based mind control techniques such as hypnotism, rituals, mind-altering drugs, and neurolinguistic programming, i.e., rote memorization of magic words, techniques that have been traditionally component of religious ceremonies, from the mystical priesthoods of Babylon, Greece, Rome, and Egypt to the cults of today? I mean, it seems logical.
Well, so I want to revisit the context of Genuflect, right? Are both of you guys familiar with Genuflect?
No.
Okay, so Genuflect might be an outlier in some ways because it was written as if she was being hired to be a lecturer, like a private lecturer for someone that was researching kind of like a homunculus, to put it lightly. And she gets there and she gets kidnapped by two MI6 agents, and then they bring her into this small town, or like a little like miniature town empire into itself. And then within there's this huge skyscraper building, and the skyscraper building is hooked up to all the urinals and all the toilets and everything, so that anyone that goes in and out of this building, they're harvesting their urine and their feces and any other bodily fluid you can imagine, and it's just constantly refining. And there's people that have to go through this, and there's people of all classes, especially higher class. But so essentially, spoiler alert in a way, although it's hard to spoil, like 500 pages of Twyman writing in a few seconds. But
Sure.
at the very end, we know that there's this kind of like head honcho of the Illuminati, the guy that sits in the middle chair, the baddest chair of all of them, and he kind of like hits a button, so to speak, and all of these different fluids that are being harvested and have this energy and stuff, they turn into this crazy monstrous amalgamation that puts forth like a white baby and a black baby, and it's got all this tarot style symbolism, but it's all happening as if it turns into that movie Society in a way at the very end. And just like the movie Society, it's like, well, did the person putting that out think that a bunch of elites literally get in a room and fuse their naked bodies together into one amorphous like sexual blob of wrinkles and nose hair or whatever, right? Like, it's not that literal. So as I was going through Genuflect, I was like, how much of that, like, where's the exact line? Was she actually invited? Have she ever actually been kidnapped by an MI6 agent that told her as such? Has she actually ever had her feet severed and then reattached using alchemical means? Like, I would love to know, but part of what made it such an engaging read is that I couldn't pinpoint where that exact spot on the spectrum was, and she like jumps in and out of it so like fluent, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, keep in mind that Tracy had an outstanding sense of humor too. And so like shortly before she passed, she had made a video with a friend of hers where they were doing a Ouija board seance to Prince. So like Prince had died and she was like contacting Prince, but they're like laughing but also kind of serious at the same time. At a certain point, it was like, we're not talking to Prince, are we? Like this was some other entity that they were communicating with, and then they were tripping out on it. But they're also like having a good time at the same time. Like it wasn't like, so she had a perspective and she had a sense of humor, I guess is my only point. So take certain things from her with a grain of salt, I guess you should say. I can say
it's a fair point. I mean, I can't really. I was just introduced to her work less than like a week ago, or maybe like a week total. After I've gone through and I've read just Genuflect and just like the first 2/3 of Minnie Mouse, or Minnie's Moose or whatever. So I'm still figuring out, like, is she a Robert Anton Wilson or a Burroughs in a way where she has this insider info but's putting out in a slightly different way? Is she almost like a Hunter S. Thompson of like the occult world?
The gonzo of occult.
Yeah, I guess those are legitimate questions, because this is what's going through my mind as I'm introduced to this work. And on top of that, I've been doing a series called Occult Disney for well over a year, going on 2 years now. And I feel like I have to go back to square one, and I got to redo every episode of Occult Disney now with Twyman in my brain.
Right. Yeah. And so if you're looking at Minnie's Moose, Mouse, whatever, you want to look at, like you are, I think, is you want to look at the PDF and the film series, because the film series has things that aren't in the PDF and the PDF has things that aren't in the film series. So, and some of it has just been like huge for me.
Right. Well, what we were watching is Andreas courageously threw up some of the video at the beginning. When she mentions the polka dotted bow in the hair, that was not in the presentation. And as soon as I heard her say that, I was like, damn, it really does add an extra level where there is, I guess in a critical sort of way, there is this flow, even in that quote that Andreas brought up, where she'll make like four like theories. She'll kind of like put forward 4 ideas, and she'll usually be like, well, if you agree with A, then probably B. And if you agree with B, then probably C, and then therefore D. And I find as I'm reading Minis Moose, as I'm reading Genuflect, I'm finding when she does that and she goes through, like, sometimes it'll stack up to like a 13 combo, right? And it's like, but wait a minute, I had a question at C, and like before you E to E to F to G, like all the way to Z, right? Like I still am not sure. I'm flaky on like the second or third step there. And that like was going, but anyways, the point being that like polka dotted bow, it's like that was one of those C's. It's like, okay, now I get D and E, but now I got a question about F. And unfortunately, if this is one of her unfinished works, we don't get to say like, wait, I had a question about Z3 or something, right? Like when she gets so deep into this thread.
Well, did you get into all the Frank Sinatra stuff yet?
I did, yeah. I think I'm at the tail end of that. Like, for example, one of the things that I'm sure I've heard before and it just didn't register that was blowing my mind, thanks to Twyman's research, was that Angela Lansbury's daughter was in the Manson cult, and she was in particular the person that allegedly left, but said, hey, they're doing some weird PDF file stuff in this group. And that specific claim has been used as like the closest that they have as proof of Manson getting into those areas. And like I wasn't really even sure where that quote had come from. Of all people, Angela Lansbury. And then Twyman's like, oh, and by the way, Angela Lansbury was the handler in Manchurian Candidate, starring Frank Sinatra. And now here's like a week's worth of research to digest on just Sinatra's connection to the mob in Hollywood, and it was blowing my mind.
Totally. Yeah, she was my go-to contact for portions of when I was doing Sorry Cassandra, I Misunderstood Everything Predicts 9/11, because while I was working on that, I came across a video of like Masonic handshake stuff, because I was like, I wanted a visual representation of Masonic handshakes, and the only thing I could find, I found, I think, on YouTube. And I was like, I looked at it and I was like, wait, this is Tracy Twyman. And I was like, I'm friends with Tracy Twyman on freaking Facebook. So I sent Tracy Twyman my first private message to her. I was like, hey, apparently this is your video. And I was like, good job. And she was like, yeah, I did that in college. And then I just started, like, whenever I had a question about something occult related for a while, I just send her a private message, and she just turned me on to all these really cool, crazy things that to this day were really impactful. Like The Smallest Show on Earth, also titled Big Operators, which was a really weird, obscure, older film with Peter Sellers about a theater that she's basically pointing out the way that, like, there's stuff in this movie that relates to a lot of things with Kubrick. And so it was a source of inspiration for different places throughout his film career. Like, there's strong arguments for it. She also turned me on to a episode of, I think we've talked about it before, but Laurel and Hardy, the Sons of the Desert episode about the secret fraternity that was kind of like the Rotary Club or Lions or Freemasonry or whatever you want it to be. But yeah, so like both of these, she's like, you have to watch these. And so like I watched them, and yeah, they're, like I say, they were super impactful. But she was like a really great, amazing resource when it came to anything occultism related with like occult pop culture stuff. So yeah.